let's get started. Today we'll be covering why you should embed fonts, what some of the current limitations are, what to look for in font and user license agreements, a few different types of font management software, the font formats you should be using for embedding, where to access fonts, particularly free fonts, how to embed from InDesign, and then I'll briefly touch on through that how to link fonts with @FontFace, and then finally a little bit on creating font stacks so that older e-readers will still display your ebooks well, even though they may not cater to your embedded font of choice. So fonts are software, and that's why you will be agreeing to end user license agreements when you use them. So previously, fonts needed to be embedded on a device to have them used, but now with the CSS @FontFace rule, you can link fonts to a document in the same way you would link a photo. So let's see how this works. Okay, so why embed fonts? Obviously for the user's experience. I remember the first book that I read on the iPad was Hunger Games, and so now every time I see Palatino, I'm like, oh, Hunger Games, I don't want to see it anymore. So also to differentiate your product from books that will just use device system fonts. Print and ebook consistency. If you can find a really good font that it also has licensing for ebooks, then you could combine those two and use the same font in both books. And then also for special characters. So what are the current barriers to font embedding? The biggest one is probably end user license agreements. A lot of font foundries are really hesitant to have fonts in ebooks just because the EPUB file can be unzipped, and then those fonts can easily be pirated if someone wants to do that. So that's the biggest one. And then a lot of type foundries, even if say they are willing to have fonts for sale, if font encryption happens, they haven't priced it and they haven't modeled it that well. Then some older e-readers do not allow for font embedding, and then one of the issues that may not be an issue in the future is lack of device connectivity. As soon as there's guaranteed connectivity for devices, then it's possible that scripting could allow things like typekit to be used for ebooks, but that hasn't happened yet. And then also the trial and error process of getting those fonts into ebooks is a little bit tedious. So what to look for in end user license agreements. Many publishers might not know this, but their fonts can't, the fonts that are in your possession can't necessarily be used in ebooks. You'll need to get explicit approval to have those fonts in ebooks. So if you have a collection of fonts and you'd like to use them for your ebooks, it's somewhat unlikely that you will be able to get those license agreements. I recommend reaching out to the font foundries directly to get those approvals. You may need to pay an additional fee to get that usage. Yeah, as I note here, most font license agreements restrict distribution, which is what EPUBs are considered because they can be unzipped and then the fonts can be pirated. So what to look for? Usually the language within a font license is pretty explicit, and you probably want to search out those font foundries, type sellers that cater to ebooks, because that way you won't be liable for infringing on those rights. So one place is FontSpring, and they have created a license agreement for eBooks. And I actually just wanted to thank anyone from the Twitter eProduction group, because they were the ones who spoke with FontSpring and got that ebook licensing to a reasonable price. So, I mean, it's still $224 for the font that I had selected here, but at least that's a little bit more reasonable than $3,000, as you may have seen in the previous slide. Okay, so another thing to consider is that when you're downloading free fonts from anywhere on the web, you'll want to check the license agreement, because it may not be allowed in eBooks. Some fonts aren't even allowed in PDFs. So take a read through, and then some language to look for is redistribution, distribution, extraction, download. And then I added modification here because sometimes you may want to convert the file format, which I'll get into a little bit later. You might want to change the format from TrueType to OpenType, or vice versa. So if you're getting a free font, you probably want to look for that modification just in case you need it in the future. And then some open font licenses to look for that are pretty much a guarantee that you can use them in your books is the SIL International Open Font License right here, Apache, and then Creative Commons. Sometimes that requires attribution, so we'll talk about it later, but you can include a colophon page, and then that will give attribution to the type designer. So this is what a good font and user license agreement looks like for eBooks. So they can embed into eBooks, multiple copies, subsequent versions. You don't need to pay each time you republish an ebook. And then any font that's a paid font will likely require the obfuscation and encryption. So InDesign allows for that. So and we'll cover that a little bit later. So since there aren't many resources for purchasing premium fonts, unfortunately, we're sort of limited in where we can get our fonts from. So some of the more reliable sources online for free fonts are Google Web Fonts, League of Movable Type, Font Squirrel. Some other ones are DaFont, SIL International. I have a whole list of places where you can download free fonts from that'll be included in the PDF resources, and then of course FontSpring, as I mentioned. So before you download any more fonts, I really recommend getting a font management application. All Macs come with the font book pre-installed, but it's not my favorite application. Some of the other ones out there are Font Explorer, FontCase, and Suitcase Fusion. Suitcase Fusion actually has a tie-in to InDesign, but it's not my favorite in terms of previewing. It has a long lag time for previewing. FontCase has a really nice user interface, but I haven't worked with it too much. The one that I really like is Font Explorer. And as it says here, you can preview all your fonts in one place, compare fonts, and then you can also see the font license and the font license and then the official name of the font, which you might want to include in your CSS just so that you're consistent. And as I mentioned, all of these have free demo versions. Most of them cost about $100, but I think it's a worthwhile investment if you don't already have one. This is just a kind of grainy image of Font Explorer X, which is the one that I'm using. The cool thing here is that you can test out special characters, and then you can find which ones, like right here, aren't in the character set. But probably the biggest reason that you'll want to get a font management app is because you can organize your fonts into different categories. And what I've done here is kind of hard to see, but I've made a folder of Google Web Fonts. So all of the free fonts that I've downloaded, just to keep them organized and keep them separate from the system fonts or your Adobe fonts or whatever else you've downloaded. That way, when you're doing ebook design, you know what to compare. If you can't use premium fonts, you can use these Google Web Fonts and just look through all of them, and then also check out their licensing information and whether or not that needs attribution, things like that. Okay, so what do we need to know when it comes to font formats? The EPUB spec only lists OpenType as a, well, it also now lists the web open font format, but we'll just ignore that for now since there's not really much support for that. But it says OpenType. So although the spec lists OpenType, most e-readers, and I'm not sure of which ones don't, also support TrueType. So they can be used interchangeably. And like I said, you can also convert. So if you're having trouble with TrueType font, then you can convert it to OpenType and then change all of the information in your content.opf file if you need to. As I mentioned, we're kind of in a tricky spot when it comes to font usage in ebooks. So one of the most reliable places is Google Web Fonts. And for this presentation, I downloaded a whole bunch of them and really tested them to see if there were any that looked good in prints, what looked good for ebooks. And it seems like there's probably about, let's say, 25, maybe 25 to 40 really good fonts that could be used more so for headings, but there's probably 10, maybe 12 really good ones that can be used for body copy. But when you're looking for free fonts, you really want to make sure that it has the styles that you need. So you'll want the bold italics, just so that if you need that variation, they'll be there. And not all Google fonts have that. As you can see in the image here, the Noto Sans has 4 styles, and luckily this one has italics and bold italics, but that was not true for all Google Web Fonts. So you really want to do a lot of testing before you download them. All of the Google fonts have open font licenses, but if you're downloading from another resource, just make sure you check over the end user license agreements. So font embedding workflows. There's three ones that I'll be touching on today. Font embedding from InDesign with encryption. So this is for premium fonts or fonts with end user license agreement restrictions. You can also use encryption for any fonts, but the ones that are paid are going to require encryption. And then for free open license fonts, you can remove that encryption. And then when it comes to other workflows, you can link with @FontFace, but again, this requires an open font license. So embedded font support by device. Now, this should be the yes, but matrix. Personally, I only have the iPad device, so I can only vouch for iBooks, Kobo, and Adobe Digital Editions. But in theory, you can embed fonts in all of these devices, but maybe we can have a little discussion afterwards about people's troubles with each specific device, and you can help me alter this a little bit so that it's more realistic as per your experiences. All right, so if you're embedding from InDesign, the first thing you'll want to do is to prep the file. So that means that you're going, well, if you're first starting with with font embedding, with, say, free fonts, you'll want to maybe create a house style. If you find some fonts that you really like and maybe you'd like to use for a series of ebooks, you can do that with by importing paragraph and character styles. And then you'll want to replace all of the print fonts with those in the paragraph styles. A recommendation that I really want to emphasize is using character styles, because this just cleans up your CSS and your HTML files later on, so that you don't have to hunt for where that accent was or where the italics were. So be really diligent in your InDesign prepping of files and make sure that all of the characters that require specific character styles are used. Some recommendations I have here: bold italics, bold italics. You want to differentiate those because they'll be their own font for the most part. Small caps, caps, drop caps, special characters. Here I've just shown you the glyph palettes, and say you have a font that doesn't support an accent. What I just did here was to show that you can use your special character styles to then later dictate in your CSS a different font that maybe looks really close to the ideal, and you can link to that with font face just for those specific characters. So again, cleaning up your files, you'll want to remove hyphenation, justification, software terms, tabs, and then you'll want to apply paragraph styles without overrides, because overrides creates a single instance. You probably want to remove that so that your CSS is a little bit cleaner. So indent, spacing, font size, leading, and color. So when you are exporting to EPUB from InDesign, you'll want to include your style definitions, because that writes the CSS, and then include the embeddable fonts. And then I personally don't use the preserve local overrides because I feel like it bogs down the CSS a little bit. So what does InDesign do when they're embedding those fonts? They're going to encrypt the font files, alter them, and then create an encryption.xml file into the meta.inf file. It also creates a font folder within the OEBPS folder. And I just noted the capitalization because you'll need to cite it within your content.opf file. So just remember that so that it doesn't trip you up later on. And then your fonts are listed in the CSS file under the font face rule, and then in subsequent character and paragraph styles. So what InDesign doesn't do, and this may just be a personal problem, maybe other people have had it too. So it writes the @font face with the font family. Now I found that this was tricky for me to get right displaying. So what I did was change the font family name to just the specific font instead of the general term for the font family. And when I did this, I also changed the font weight to normal, because by importing, say, a bold, that it will just import the font as is and not apply the bold styling. So I'll show you in the next slide. This is what InDesign gave, and this is what I changed it to. This is just, perhaps this is just a personal preference, but it also keeps it so that your font file names in the future are all set to what you're using instead of the font family. And then again, what you'll need to do, and this may not be the case with future versions of InDesign, I'm not sure, but InDesign does not include the media typed content, or the media type into your content.opf file. So you need to add those. And as I said, this PDF slideshow you can have the slides. So if you don't need to write this down, you can just take it out of the slides later on. So you'll need to list each of the fonts, individual fonts that you're using, the names. If they contain spaces, then you'll put an underline, and then you'll link to the file. And again, this needs to be capitalized, the F on the fonts file. And then the media type is applications x-font-ttf. There are multiple ways to write that, which I'll touch on briefly later. Okay, so if you keep the encryption files, you'll receive a warning with EPUB check, but it will still pass validation. So removing InDesign encryption. If you are using free fonts and you don't require the encryption and you find it's maybe bogging you down a little bit when you're trying to test your font files, you can easily remove them, remove the encryption. So you'll want to get rid of the encryption.xml file from the meta-inf folder. And then you'll want to replace all of the fonts that were produced from the InDesign encryption with the original font files. Now this is another advantage of using font management software. When you have those files, you need to find them, and the quickest way that I get to that is through my Font Explorer. I just search for the fonts, go reveal in Finder, and then just copy and paste those back into the fonts folder. So character sets. So the XML declaration at the top of the content.opf file says that it's version 1.0, and then the encoding is UTF-8. So UTF-8 allows you to use all of the characters within Unicode, which is over 1 million possible codes. So in ideal readers, well, ideally you could use any character that you need, but what it comes down to is support within e-readers. So the e-readers of Adobe Digital Editions, Kindle, and Sony do not support the entire Unicode character set, but for most purposes with English publishing, I haven't had any trouble. Maybe that's something that we can discuss a little bit later on as to what is limited within Kindle and Sony and Adobe, but for the most part, I haven't had any trouble with special characters that I've put in. And then, as I mentioned here, the diamond question mark of death, that's probably because the font that you're using doesn't support the character. So you can test those beforehand. If you have a book that you know requires an accent aigu or an accent grave or something like that, you can put it in your font management software when you're testing your fonts before you even typeset, and that way you'll have a better sense of whether or not you will use the font that you've selected. And then in the resources, I've also included a Unicode injector script for InDesign, so it makes searching for those special glyphs a little bit easier when you use that. Okay, so attaching fonts for special characters. Like I said, you may need a certain portion of Unicode and hopefully your e-reader supports that. So, but in the instance that, say, you're using for this example, I was using Gentium, and some of those some of those characters weren't supported. So what I did was I selected the characters that weren't supported, and I used Linux Libertine. And what I did there was I created a character style just for those accents and applied the Linux Libertine to those characters. Another option is, well, an extension of that option would be to attach a font just for a certain Unicode range. So in this example, say you have a block of Japanese text that you need to include. Rather than including the whole font, which may be large because it has a full range, to keep your file size down, you can just select the block of Unicode that you require for your text. So in this example, I don't think it's Japanese, but the Unicode is listed right here, and that will just reduce your file size. So now, changing gears a little bit, this is a special fix just for iBooks. It takes a little bit more to get fonts to display in iBooks. So what you'll need to do is to, after you've exported from InDesign using encryption, what you'll need to do is create an XML file name that is exactly com.apple.ibooks.display/options.xml, and then you're going to input this little bit of code. So what that does is the asterisk, as many of you are probably aware, is just to dictate that all Apple devices will read this and apply this, and we'll use the specified fonts. So you'll put this block of text in that XML file and then save it to the meta.inf folder. And then you're going to change the content.opf file. You're going to change that second line of coding from what's listed here to what is listed here. And then further down the page under the metadata, you're going to include the meta property iBooks specified fonts true line. And so then that will display iBooks, or display encrypted fonts to iBooks. So tips for troubleshooting. These are just a few. Obviously, there's a long list of things that can be changed when you're testing your ebooks. One of the big ones is your file names and your paths. Make sure that you're aware of all of your cases and check your spelling, and then double check them and check them again. If you're having trouble with displaying an embedded font, you can try to convert the font from whatever format it's in to either OpenType or TrueType, depending on which you were using in the first place. I find that I haven't had a problem with either of these formats, but one thing that I did run into, which made me question a little bit, is that Google Web Fonts, I believe that they export all of their fonts into TrueType, but then within font management software, it will say OpenType. For whatever reason, this hasn't hindered the ebook conversions that I've done, but it's something to be aware of if you're running into a problem. You may want to tweak that, convert them, and then save them to the new format, and then that also requires going through all of your coding, both your CSS and your content.opf file, and making sure that you change the extensions and the file names from, say, OTF to TTF. It's a lot of work, but I mean, if it can fix your font embedding problems, it may be worthwhile to you. And then, as I mentioned previously, you can change the @font face linking. So rather than have the full font family and then just calling bold through the font weight, you can put that to normal, and then that will just call the whole font, the specific font, and then use that throughout your CSS. And as I mentioned before, the media types, there are a few different ones. Prior to EPUB 3, there was no official media type, so there's kind of a hodgepodge of different media types that are listed in different people's content.opf file. So the official media type for OpenType is application/vnd.ms-opentype, and there's no official media type. For TrueType. But before this presentation, I didn't know about the official media type in the form of vnd.ms-opentype, and I was using x-font-OTF and TTF, and I wasn't having any problems. So I think those are sort of deprecated media types that are still being used by e-readers. Okay, and more graceful degradation. So the font stack. You've probably seen this a lot online for websites. What it does is it calls different fonts in descending order of what you would like to view. So if you put Helvetica in and the user doesn't have Helvetica, then usually the next font in the stack would be Arial, and all computers have Arial, so that will be displayed in lieu of Helvetica. So that's exactly what we're doing for ebook readers. So if you embed a font and either font embedding isn't approved on the device of choice, then it will try the next font in the stack, and if that font isn't available on the device, then the next one and the next one until you get to those generic ones of serif or sans serif or cursive, whatever style may be that you need in your ebook. So the finesse that comes with font stacks is really knowing the device system fonts, which I actually had a lot of trouble finding. Like I said, I mostly work with the iPad and Kobo, so I was trying to find some of those older ones for e-ink, just so that you have a better sense of what fonts to include in your font stacks after those initial embedded fonts. So here's what I found, which are some of the older ones. I know this isn't a full list, but if you want to give these a try, if you know that your readers are reading on any of these devices and you want to give them a similar reading experience from the embedded font that you're using, you can give any of these a try. I'm sorry they're not styled the way the font looks. I didn't have enough time to go and individually grab all the screenshots for these fonts. But if say you know that a lot of your readers are reading on Kobo Touch, you can just search all these font names in Google Images, and they'll return the font style and what it looks like and whether or not you want to include that in your font stacks so that they degrade well over those older devices. And another resource that's out there is the website identifont.com, and it just gives you suggestions for other fonts to use in lieu of the one that you want. It's not catered specifically to EPUB or ebook designers, unfortunately, but you might hit on one that you really like and it's supported. So that's a good resource. And then coming up to the end of our seminar here, you need to test, and it's a lot of fun, and it can be really challenging, but then once you get it, hopefully you'll be really happy with the results. And the thing too is to try to work with as many devices as possible. I know I'm saying that I only have the iPad, but I mean it's to your benefit to really test on as many devices as you can, and also just to try sample EPUBs before you go and do the whole book. If you find a font that you really like and you think could work for multiple titles, then just create like a one-off and then try that on as many devices as you can, and get a feel for how the font looks, whether the kerning and tracking are good, how it lays out, what it looks like on the screen, whether or not it has those special characters that you need, small caps, drop caps, all of that stuff. And it's tedious, but you know, there's other people out there doing the same work as you, and they're just trying to deliver the best to their readers. So you're in good company. And another bit of advice is for the colophon page. I think I'm saying that right. So for some fonts, you'll need to include the license or attribution when you're using the free fonts. So a good excuse is to create a colophon page. This one is from Frederick Goody's book, The Alphabet. And there's a lot of samples out there, obviously, that you can use. So include the type specifications in your book, list the fonts that you use, font size, name of the types name of the type designer, the font's backstory if you know it. Sometimes that requires a little bit of digging when you're using free fonts, free web fonts. And then, of course, the license if you need it. This is also a good practice because it lets other book designers look at your book and take a look at where you found the fonts, and it kind of we can help each other out by using these pages and crediting the fonts that we use. And so this is a colophon for this presentation. Both of the fonts that I used today were from Google Web Fonts. So they're open license, and you can use them if you so desire. And they're both under the SAL Open Font license.